this off, we thought it would be fun for everyone to tell us a fun fact about themselves. So why don't we start with Coral, and we'll just go down the line.
Fun fact. Let's see. I don't know, I have so many. So hard to pick. I guess I'll pick one related to entrepreneurship. So actually, my husband and I both decided to start companies like within the same month, different companies. So I started SENREVE, and he started a cross-border VC fund. And so for a while, because it's startup craziness, we were running both companies out of our house. And so our daughter was kind of like assisting both companies. Like she would help with, putting the security tags on bags or joining conference calls and typing up little memos, and she would like seal the envelope for certain things. So that was a really fun part of the experience, actually. And it seems like ages ago, but it was just last year.
I will go with something, I guess, not directly kind of founder related, I guess, which is I have camped on all 7 continents. I used to be a super avid traveler, and now I have a startup and 2 kids, and I'm not really an avid traveler these days, sadly. But I was really into camping and hiking, and even after I left McKinsey and started kind of thinking about this category and wanting to build something in this space, I kind of hit the road and spent a lot of time reading and exploring and camping, and it's a big part of my journey, actually.
So, fun fact about me, I was actually born in Calcutta, India. Based on my accent, people think I'm either from South Africa. Based on my looks, people think I'm Puerto Rican. I went to Puerto Rico a couple of years ago, and the taxi driver was so mad at me that I couldn't speak Spanish because I looked Puerto Rican that I thought he was going to leave me on the side of the road because sorry, I can't speak a word of Spanish other than saying I don't speak Spanish. But yeah, I was born in Calcutta, India. I came to the States right out of college. My maiden name is June McDonald, and as you can imagine, every time I walked someplace and I said, June McDonald, and I walked up and people were like, well, you don't look like June McDonald. Don't know what June McDonald looks like.
You made a mistake.
But yeah.
Yeah. So, fun fact about me. So I'm very tall, and I was recruited onto the crew team at Cornell. And to graduate from Cornell, you have to pass a swim test.
Oh my gosh, I know that, because I can't swim.
Oh,
so
no.
I did not apply to Cornell.
Oh. It takes out of school. But yeah, you have to swim back and forth a lap. And so they actually had some of the members of the crew team like standing by the pool, like watching you swim, like who would be. And so I had never rowed in my life, but they said, okay, you're a strong swimmer, you can row. So I joined the crew team thinking it was like a very slow, like graceful sport, and it would be like tranquil, and it's not. And anyone who knows about rowing, it's very competitive and fast-paced, and there are races. It's but I got into it because I'm an ambitious, competitive person, and I just really took to it. So that's me. I'm looking for a partner, a pair.
So my fun fact is that I accidentally ran a marathon. I was training for the SF marathon. I signed up for it, but then I had to travel a bunch for work and wasn't able to train as much as I would have liked. So I said, okay, I'll just run the first half of it. And then I was thinking, how am I going to get back to the starting point? If I only run half the marathon and I have a full marathon bib, and then I was like, well, if I feel okay running across the Golden Gate, then I'll just run the entire thing. So that's what I did.
Wow.
Great.
That sounds so horrifying, like, to realize midway, like, oh no, I'm in a marathon.
Yeah. Well, my motivation was if I did this, then I wouldn't have to do it again, right? So it's my first and last marathon. But anyway,
did it.
Enough about me. I'm more interested in you ladies and understanding kind of what motivated you to get to where you are today. And so, Serena, I know that community is really important and core to what you do, and I'd love to hear more about that and how that influences your career.
Yeah, that's such a great question. Well, so, as a filmmaker, and it's similar to being a startup founder, like you are running the ship, but actually similar to running a company, it's not just you. You're always reliant on the team that you build together, and you're going there with a group. Not only that, you have the community around you, and I find that when you have hurdles and obstacles, it's so important to know who you can tap into in your community to ask for help. And that's really important, to be able to be vulnerable and to reach out to those people. So, yeah, I'm part of a few filmmaker groups and startup groups. Just to share sort of one example from this, 2 years ago, I was directing a music video, and the location that we had planned to shoot at, I'd been meeting with the director of photography, I'd been meeting with the set designer. This is like weeks and thousands of dollars in the planning, and then the week before filming, it just, the location fell through, and I thought, oh my God, what am I gonna do? It's 1 week away. But I went into my co-working space the following day, and anyway, that my series is now set in a co-working space, because I thank goodness for co-working spaces, so that I don't have to work alone. So I went into my co-working space, and I told my friend at the co-working space, like, my location fell through, I don't know what to do. And she said, oh, Serena, you should come to my wine and cheese event that's happening tonight. There's like an awesome group of people, like, we're gonna help you find something. And so I went, and it turned out, like, at that group, there was someone who had just been to the Golden Globes the night before, and she had actually flown back to San Francisco, and she was still wearing the fake eyelashes, like, from that evening event. But it turns out, someone from that group said, hey, you can film at my house. And I went and visited her house. It was beautiful. It was gorgeous, even better than the first film location. And I'm so lucky that I was able to ask for help and to have a community, like a co-working space. I also have my filmmaking group, so that I was able to go and ask for help when I needed it. And yeah, I think that's a really important part of creating a big project.
Yeah, it's so important. Was that a question or no? Okay. So have any of you ladies had that moment where, serendipitously something happened, or you had to reach out really deep into your networks to try to get something to happen? Because I know I've experienced that in my experience as an entrepreneur. Anything you guys want to talk about?
Sure, I'll share. I mean, I think there are so many junctures, that determine whether or not you're going to make it to the next juncture. For me, with SENREVE in particular, the concept really was this idea and frustration I had with not ever being able to find the perfect luxury work bag, right? As you know, I worked at Medallia, I traveled a ton, I went through all these bags, and when I was at Medallia, I worked with pretty much all the top retail brands, like Chanel and Sephora. And anyhow, I would go to these meetings with like an ugly Toomey laptop case and be so embarrassed that they were judging me, but I had to carry like my laptop and presentation materials and things like that. So I switched to, a more luxury bag, but then the problem was things would fall apart, and it was just not really made for that particular lifestyle, for the woman who has to go from day to night, carry a laptop, transition from a formal event, a work event, to a more casual event, and so on. So I found that frustration, and basically in the course of creating SENREVE, I looked all over the world really for a great manufacturing partner, right? Because I knew that that was going to be a critical part of being able to execute the vision. And it's really, really hard to find that type of partner, because it's not something that you could Google, right? It's not like transparent. It's extremely opaque, and actually, because we want to create luxury products in that traditional way, but update the design, have a direct-to-consumer model, it's really a fusion of the traditional and the updated. And so the traditional aspect of it was so hard to uncover these factories and manufacturers. I really had to tap deep into my retail network, my network of advisors, folks who are like the current CEO of Kate Spade, who is the head of shoes and bags for Michael Kors, and Domenico De Sole, who is the CEO of Gucci. And it's very interesting, right? Because I will say they're extremely helpful and giving in their own ways. But I think as a founder or as an entrepreneur, you really need to also take their advice with a grain of salt, right? So, for example, Anna, who was the head of Michael Kors and really built that business, highly advocated against manufacturing in Italy. And that was her experience, right? She was like, do it in China, it's more efficient, it's more cost effective, and she had her reasons. And Domenico, very different, right, because of his Gucci background. And so I think for me, I really had to learn to apply my own judgment to understand like who is going to deliver the quality product, who is going to be able to execute on that vision. And we ultimately landed with a partner in Florence that we still work with today, who is a generations old factory that works primarily with Fendi and Celine and so forth. And we're very, very lucky to have found them and partner with them.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to, it's almost as if manufacturers do not want to be found, and they're not online. I remember calling and pounding pavement trying to find a manufacturer, and like calling this company, and they picked up and they said something in Chinese, and then they like put down the phone, and I was like, does anyone speak English here? And it was like passed around to 5 different people until I found someone. But that actually ended up being my factory, so perseverance definitely pays off.
I have sort of a opposite experience almost in a way. I mean, a different experience, which was, I think so before I started Rocksbox, I worked at McKinsey in New York, and before that I worked at Bain in LA. So I had this kind of I came out of business school, I went into consulting, I worked in the client space, and especially in New York, it was like a very kind of non-risk-taking type of environment. And when I decided that I wanted to leave and start something in this space, I was really compelled to kind of reimagine the jewelry category specifically. I feel like my friends, my friends from business school and my colleagues at McKinsey, they were like, what is she doing? What is Meg up to? And so my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, was at the GSB at Stanford. And so I kind of moved out here, but I didn't know anyone out here. I sort of felt like, I just didn't know. I didn't know how the venture world worked at all. I didn't know what a term sheet was. I didn't know how to incorporate. I kind of felt like I was really starting from zero. And, in retrospect, I think I started Rocksbox in 2012, and we raised our Series A in 2016. That was 4 years of cranking away, kind of trying to figure out how it worked. And it was fun and rewarding and all that, and also exhausting, and it required a ton of perseverance. And it was a lot of just putting one foot in front of the other, going to events like this. I sort of every night would go to an event and try to build a relationship and try to figure out how the world worked, how this whole startup world worked. And I just say that because I don't want any of you guys to think that you have to have connections and relationships and know how things work in order to get something off the ground. And I think in retrospect for me, I probably could have leaned on other people more than I did. I sort of have this mentality of I'm going to do it all myself, or I sort of felt like in the beginning it was tied to how hard I would work would be how successful I could be. And I've realized over the years that a lot of it is leaning on the people, building a network for yourself, building a community for yourself, and leaning on those people. But you don't have to have it from square one. I think it's also worth knowing that that happens over time, over the course of your career, but it is worth investing in and fostering that community. People, and this is something that I think is especially true out here in the Bay Area. It's people are so willing to pay it forward and to give back and to answer an email. And so that's just such an amazing aspect of the culture out here. And I don't think Rocksbox would exist if it weren't for that. So anyway, that was sort of my experience in terms of how I thought about a network and how that was part of my journey so far.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I mean, have all of you experienced people being more willing to help than you expected them to be?
I think it varies. I think in my case, unfortunately, I'm not in fashion. I think on hindsight, I wish I was. I think it would have been a lot more easier for me. No offense, but I'm a product geek. I came into college, I came out of college, went into tech, and I've been in tech all my life. And what I have in my experience, it wasn't really serendipitous. It was just, how many of you have been to a QBR? How many of you like being in a QBR for 3 days? Now, I spend my, really? I spent my career on a quarterly basis being at 3 or 4 or 5 QBRs, and what I've kind of found is that
QBRs for everyone is the quarterly business reviews.
As you know, the saying is, if you've kind of done something for 14 or 15,000 hours, you become an expert. I kind of became an expert in kind of understanding the different dynamics of the go-to-market engine, so from products to sales to marketing. And I kind of reached a point where I could see the gaps between those go-to-market functions, and being a product geek, I actually built a big data analytics product that combines those engines together. And when you talk about a network and we talk about people being more receptive, just as Jerry Maguire, when you had me at Hello, I lost people when I said big data analytics. Because when I looked at funding and I went for funding, I spoke to about 80 VCs. And there were female VCs and male VCs. Do you know how many asked me about my product? 1. Bain Capital. The VC at Bain Capital asked me about my product, and we actually went through the architecture and where I had the patents that I had filed. I had filed 6 patents, and he wanted to know where it was. But do you know how many comments I got on my hair, my looks, my dress, my shoes? I got a lot of comments on my shoes. Got a lot of comments on the way I dressed. But none of these VCs, like I said, just 1 talked about my product and the architecture, because everybody just assumed I was coming in for something that was girl-related, a woman-related, a female-related. But really, when you talked about big data analytics, and that's why I say it depends, because when you're in tech, and I'm assuming most of you are, the barriers to entry and the barriers to success is very different than if you were in a different sector. And those barriers to entry really vary based on the sector you're in. It's easier to be in a certain sector regardless of your gender. It's harder to be in a certain sector based on your gender. And I think being in tech and being in Silicon Valley, where innovation is rampant, but it's very secular to the male population. And I think that's why when you talk about networks and you talk about community, it depends on which sector you're in. Some are much more welcoming for any gender or any race. Some are still very secular towards the male, and tech particularly is very male-centric. It's all boys club there.
And June, you actually took that experience and it motivated you to where you are today. And can you kind of tell us how you turned that into something more?
Yeah, so like I said, I went, when I was doing my venture capital funding, literally pounded the streets. I reached out to over 300 VCs, both I would say across the states, so all the way from Austin to Boston to New York to Silicon Valley. I spent more time on Sand Hill Road than anybody else would. I also went all the way to Dubai seeking funding, and guess what? I was able to get funding in Dubai if I became a citizen of Dubai. And I valued my US citizen, I don't know why, much more than being a citizen of Dubai, but I would have got funded. And people look at Dubai and people look at the Middle East and go, how backward are those people, right? One, they don't let women drive. Women are second-class citizens. Women are this and women are that. But what you don't see is the ecosystem that they're building is so much far advanced than the United States. In the US, 84 billion, or almost, if you look at 2018, it'll reach over $100 billion in startup funding. Do you know how much goes to female founders? 2%. 2% of that $100 billion goes to female founders. And we in the United States, particularly in the Bay Area, are oblivious to that fact. Because we just think that, startups get funded. Look at all the success that's coming out of Silicon Valley. But we don't realize that there's so many female founders that just get pigeonholed because they're females. And what I did as the question came out is that when I looked at my experience, what I did was pivoted. I looked at success, not on getting that term sheet signed or getting VC funding. What I did was pivoted to the point where I said, you know what, this is crap, pardon the expression. But we're in Silicon Valley, more female founders should get funded. So I kind of created a nonprofit for female founders, and it's called Female Founders Faster Forward. And the intent is to look at startups objectively. So it's kind of like FICO score for startups, where you look at the startups objectively, and it doesn't matter whether you're female, it doesn't matter if you're black, white, or blue, or brown like me, it doesn't matter what your social economic background, whether you went to an Ivy League school or not, it looks at that startup. And that's what the intent is, to look at the startup and then kind of determine whether or not it's worth investing in or not.
Yeah, I would just say to that, I think part of it too is representations in the media, and that's what drove me to want to write and direct a series about female founders, and also do it with a comedy too, because that's what I love. But yeah, I think that the way that we think, in the popular culture, the way that we think about someone in tech or a startup founder, that we still have this sort of male dude bro, guy in a hoodie mentality, and then meeting actual founders, that is not the case for female founders. Female founders are not just gal in a hoodie. Female founders that exist in the world are really badass, have to be excellent in programming and technically savvy, but also really great at pitching and building products and motivating people to be part of a team. And we were talking about this earlier, that female founders have to be that much more ahead of the game. And so you have to look like a Series A company if you're going for angel funding, and a Series B company if you're going for Series A funding. So I think showcasing the exciting realm that is female founders doing their startups is really cool to explore and showcase in the media.
Yeah, it's definitely, in my experience, I've had a lot of experiences being in a room and feeling like there's certain expectations of me where, either I was there to, take notes or something like that, right? And I remember very clearly when I was at a company, my first company, we were getting acquired by IBM, and we had to go through this due diligence process. So it was a week long. We were in a hotel room with 50 people from IBM, and there were 5 of us. And I was one of three women in the room. From IBM and myself, and the 2 women from IBM, they never spoke, and I think the expectation was that I wouldn't speak, and I actually had to get up in front of the room and walk them through our technology for half a day, and I think that sort of feeling of that expectation of I was probably in the wrong place kind of really sort of drove me and motivated me, and that was kind of my first breaking a glass ceiling experience. I'd love to hear your experiences with this, and feel free to chime in, or if you have stories that you'd like to share with the audience.
Well, I think breaking the glass is, as I said earlier in a side discussion, it's never a one-time thing. I think it's a constant. You've got to break the glass ceiling at every kind of junction of your career, or every junction of your growth. And when I was in tech, particularly in some of the companies that I was at, so I was at HP for 4 years, I never really felt that I was discriminated against, or I was pigeonholed. I held the room. I used to pitch in front of 40 CEOs at a time, and I could be the only female, and I held their attention. And I never once felt that I was any different from them. the punch in the gut came when I started looking for venture capital funding. And again, like I said, if I was, they just didn't assume that when I came into the room and I got the 20 minutes because I pitched hard on getting those 20 minutes. And it takes a lot of effort to get to that 20 minutes of their time. And when you get 80 meetings and you got the 20 minutes, and the minute you lose them is the minute you say big data analytics. And the hardest thing for me during that time is the glass ceiling didn't break because I got funding. The glass ceiling for me broke because I redefined success. I wasn't desperate enough, and not desperate enough, but I knew that with integrity, I would get funding. And if June Manley couldn't get funding for June Manley, then it wasn't worth getting funded. So I walked away from that, and I created the non-startup. Now, success for me wasn't that I signed a term sheet and I got the Series A that I was seeking. Success for me is that I pivoted so fast. I mean, literally, I closed down the startup on the 29th of June. And by the end of the 29th of June, 2017, I had female founders faster forward started. Because that's, for me, was my glass ceiling. And because I was able to pivot through the lessons learned that to kind of make it a better world, not for myself, but for my 10-year-old daughter who looked at me every day and asked me, did you get funding? And she knew my pitch by heart. By the time I spent 9 months seeking funding, she knew the startup pitch by heart. So she could give you my 2-minute elevator pitch. And that's how motivated that she was. And when she found out that I didn't get funded and I was doing the female founders, I mean, she was just, thrilled. And so for me, that was my breaking the glass ceiling. And I guess we define success and we define the glass ceiling very differently. Sometimes it comes from failure. And sometimes it comes from just pivoting. The journey that you're on or the path that you're on may not be the one that you want to be on or one you should be on. And the faster you pivot is the faster you kind of figuratively break the glass ceiling for yourself.
How about you, Meaghan?
I think similarly, I maybe think about it a little bit differently than the normal way of thinking about breaking a glass ceiling. I think for me, in my experience, one of the challenging things has been also how I see myself. And I think that, especially having a daughter, and just having kids in general, you become sort of hyper aware of how much really honestly, there are sort of like certain roles that are defined, and how there are subtle conversations and characters and, in media and things like that, that sort of you start to realize how the outside world has really sort of shaped the way you think about yourself. And, I think for me, one of the big kind of glass ceiling experiences has been stepping into my own role as a CEO and founder and getting comfortable in my own skin and figuring out what my style is and learning how to be a vulnerable leader and how to connect with people and inspire people, and how to hold people accountable and how to do that in a way that's consistent with who I am. And that's been hard, honestly. It's been super, super hard. And I think for a while, I would say I got a lot of feedback that I wasn't confident enough. And I remember thinking, like, what are you talking about? I'm confident. And I have always been confident, but I have also been insecure at the same time in terms of, am I in the right role? Can I really do this? And I think, that's a total normal founder thing. Like, that's not just a woman thing. But certainly, I think shedding even the kind of like the roles and the assumptions that even I had about myself, letting go of that and having confidence in myself and who I am and all the pieces of that, and stepping into the leader that my team needs me to be and that I want to be, that has been a glass ceiling experience for me. And that's been an incredibly rewarding, fulfilling, and hard part of this process for me. But sometimes it's what gets me out of bed in the morning, So that's been, I think, my glass ceiling.
It's been a really interesting process because I actually started my career in Asia. And maybe kind of similar to the Dubai experience that you mentioned, I thought it was, my experience was, I was at Bain, and I was analyst at the time, and I was the only female with a analyst class of 9 other men. And I think at that time I didn't really understand that I was female. You know, I was just like another one of the analysts, and we worked hard and we partied hard, and honestly, I did not fully understand this like female thing really until I was working at Medallia actually, and I had a daughter, and I think it just was like such a rude awakening for me. You know, it was like the inequality of it all. You know, you have to like bear the burden of bearing this child for 9 months, and then like nursing, and I mean, it's just this whole thing that's like biologically unequal, and I was like so angry about that. And then at the same time, I also saw like so many of my friends and my peers, because you know, motherhood is hard, right? And it's you know, it's emotional process. It's a lot of growth, and it's so hard logistically. I mean, everything about it is quite hard. Maybe even harder than starting a company, I would say. I was very depressed because I saw a lot of my peers, you know, just, I think it was, look, there's no judgment around that. I think everyone has their own choice in terms of if they want to focus on family, career, at different times of their life and so forth. But for me, it was really sad that most of my business school classmates, you know, after we graduated and we all started having children, stopped working, you know. And so I didn't feel like I had a peer group and a support group in some ways, right? So I thought that was really challenging. And I think the thing that really helped me was seeking great, you know, female mentorship who are great leaders like Amy from Medallia, you know, other founders who are female, investors and executives. And I think really finding kind of that support group and that peer group is super helpful. I think, you know, in contrast to what you were talking about, like when you say big data analytics and the investors glaze over, like when we talk about luxury handbags, the investors' eyes really glaze over, you know?
So interesting.
And most of them are, not to stereotype, but this is statistically true, you know, older white males, right? And it's really hard for them to relate to this frustration that younger female executives have. And so, you know, we tried all sorts of things, right? We called ourselves the Tesla of handbags. And just by mentioning the word Tesla, like they would be like, oh, I have a Tesla, tell me more, you know? All sorts of the Apple of handbags, you know? It just, to me, like, that part of it was actually really fun. I just saw it as a little challenge, you know? It was almost like a game, and like, ooh, you know, I got to the second meeting, that's like 5 more points for me, you know? I think fundraising is always really hard, but we try to, my co-founder and I tried to do it in a very lighthearted manner, and we never took anything personally, you know, in terms of people not returning our calls or not being interested in the company. We were just like, look, they don't get it, right? This is a huge market. There's a ton of demand. The unit economics are amazing. Like, they're missing out, you know? So I think having that mindset really helps you just like push forward when you get a lot of rejection.
Yeah, and I'm seeing common themes of like from big data to luxury bags. It's like women pitching. We have to change we talked about the mental model of when you go into the pitch and like people are expecting one thing, and you know, there's a woman who's pitching, like we have to see more female founders who are being vocal, who are being successful, who are in the media, like just seeing more and normalizing it. You know, just to piggyback off what everyone had said, you know, you get, in terms of glass ceiling, like you get a lot of no's from the outside world, and then you get a lot of no's from your inside world, the inside voice that you tell yourself. So what I would say is to honor the voice that is telling you to go ahead, and to really listen to yourself, the good voice.
I think that's such amazing advice, Serena. It's so wonderful. And I part of the reason why I shared my experience is because I want you guys all to know that you're not alone when you feel that. It's like just part of the deal. And in a way, it's something that we can share and feel not so alone in that process. And I think you're right. If you can have that kind of attitude, it's so, so helpful. And kind of surrounding yourself with people that can remind you to think about it that way is really helpful. And 100%, the more role models we have, it's like being able to see somebody that you can connect to and relate to that's been able to fight through and be successful. That's why I think what you're doing is so important. And, you know, it's just so powerful. You know, there are a handful of women in my life, and especially actually since starting Rocksbox, that have played that role for me. And it's been so, so powerful for me. It's just been wonderful. And I think just every single woman that we get out there doing something and being courageous, I think has just so much impact. So don't feel alone. Get out there, do great stuff. It's worth it.
Great. On that note, any parting advice for our audience?
Are we going to open up to questions?
So how many of you have heard of Diane Green? One, two. How many of you know that she kind of is fundamentally the person who changed how we go into the cloud? So Box is a cloud company. Diane Green founded VMware. And I asked the question in panels like this, can you name a tech founder from 10 years ago? And people will name Jack Dorsey, people name Zuckerberg, and everybody else. Can you name a tech founder from 25 years ago? You'll have Dell, you have Gates, you have all these bloody billionaires, right? And nobody would know who Diane Green is. And Diane Green was the founder of VMware. And without VMware and what they did on the computing infrastructure, we wouldn't be able to kind of be in the cloud and have billions of dollars of Google or Box or any of these companies in the cloud. And when we talk about role models, she is our role model, particularly of women in tech or any guys in tech. And we have the choice of who our role models are. And we need to seek them out, not based on how many billions they have, not based on how many PR persons they have, not based on what they're doing in Africa, and Africa is a good place to do good things, but what are they doing in our backyard? And I'll encourage you to go look at who Diane Green is and send her a thank you note to say, you know what? You changed the course of technology, particularly as it relates to the cloud. And give her thanks and actually kind of make sure that people know who she is, because that is our role model. And we as females and even males, we don't seek role models that are outside of the media. We kind of hero worship the billionaires, and all the billionaires are in the boys club, people, other than Sheryl Sandberg and a couple of other, maybe 2 or 3 women. But there's a lot of women who've kind of created technology and created the path that we are on today, and they get ignored by the media and also by us. So I would say the parting words for you, if I may, is look for heroes and look for role models that actually have paved the way of where we are today. And Diane Green is one of them.
Absolutely. I would say, you know, as you can see with all of us, we each had a fairly different and kind of curving and winding path to entrepreneurship. And I do feel like there's not one model and there's not like one playbook that you have to follow, right? And one of the fun things about my journey is that I've met so many different entrepreneurs and, you know, of various demographics, of various ages, you know, female entrepreneurs, male entrepreneurs, some people who started it as their, you know, first job and they never had any kind of training versus they started it much later in their careers. And so I would just say that before I started SENREVE, I always felt like, you know, I needed to be on a certain path, right? And especially when you start your career in a very structured place like a Bain or a McKinsey, you kind of feel like, you know, you go from the analyst to the associate to the whatever, and then you get on this path to partner. And I would say same thing in a larger tech company, right? You kind of start manager and then senior manager, director, so forth. And I would say, like, try to put that aside, you know, don't think about this, how your career is just a very linear path. It will be very winding, and I think if you want to start a company,
you can do it anytime, right? And it's like exactly like having a kid. There's never the perfect time. But once you do it, you'll be able to manage. So I would say, I would highly encourage you guys to, just embrace that authentic part of yourself and not feel like you need to follow some specific road that someone else did and they happen to be successful.
That's really good advice. I think one of the things that we talked about before is about failure as being an opportunity, and I think my lifetime before filmmaking, I really saw myself as trying to do the right things and really aiming for this almost perfectionist sort of spirit. And I think part of going off and doing your own path, where there isn't a clear delineation between step by step by step, I think you really have to try things, and some things aren't going to work out, and that's okay. And accepting a setback or even a failure, that's really an opportunity to learn. I think that when you have an experience that isn't going well or is a plateau, that really can actually get in the way of learning and growing. So my advice would be to embrace the failure, and as hard as it is to do, and still is hard to do, to really see it as an opportunity to really grow and evolve.
Absolutely. Thank you, ladies, for all the wonderful advice. Again, I apologize for being sick, but I think it is one of the themes I'm sort of hearing from all of you is that, there's nothing, we shouldn't be holding ourselves back, right? At the very least, we should be pushing ourselves forward, and I think that I really enjoyed hearing all of your stories and all of the different paths that you've taken, and I think it just really shows that there are just so many different ways that you can get there, right? And wherever there is, that's up to you guys. So thank you very much. I think we have a little bit of time for questions. Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to do here because you're close.
I think I was last to raise my hand, but yeah, so hi, my name's Lee. I think I accidentally crashed into your party before this without knowing all of you guys were panels. But I have a question about fundraising. So can each of you guys tell us about if you had a company right now, I know, did you bootstrap or did you fundraising, and between the two, what made you make the choice? Thanks.
So I knew going in that I had a high barrier, a high threshold to achieve. So coming in from tech, being in launching products all my career, I knew that I had to, rather than have an MVP, which most startups have, I had a general availability product. I had paying customers. I had 6 patents filed. I had a product that was ready to ship. I put in $1 million bootstrapped into that, and I called, my husband and I joke about it, I called it my alimony fund. But I knew that going in that the threshold was going to be high, so when I went in, I knew I had that. I had all these milestones met, and then that's kind of when I started seeking Series A, and like you said, when you go in seeking Series A, I had the milestones of a Series B. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned 80 meetings with reaching out to 300 VCs globally, and not one of them asked me about the product. And that's kind of when you look at it, and as much as you don't want to take it personally, I think while there's no crying in baseball, there's definitely crying in venture capital funding. Because when you have female VCs telling you, and the advice they give you the 20 minutes and they pull you aside outside of that conference room, and they tell you, when you have a husband who's out of Harvard, who's got a computer science degree, and he's a 10Xer, why don't you have him be the CEO of a company and let him lead the round of funding, because she couldn't.
What's a 10Xer?
Who could code in his sleep. she actually, her advice to me was that I should have him be the CEO and actually seek venture capital funding, because he is the typical look of a founder. And I cried. That was the first time I cried, and unfortunately, that wasn't the first time that happened to me. I relayed that story to other female VCs, and they patted me on the shoulder and go, you know what, you want to get funded? And I go, yes. That's the way to do it. I go, well, and when I said I redefined what the glass ceiling was for me and how I pivoted was, that's not the way I was going to get funding. Stephen Manley wasn't the face of my startup. June Manley was. And if they couldn't fund June Manley for all the milestones that I achieved with bootstrapping my own money off $1 million, and when you look at startups that stage in that category, big data analytics, enterprise software, 290 startups got funded during that time frame, that 9 months I was seeking funding. Do you know how many female founders got funded? 0. And I wanted to be the first female founder to get funded, and I couldn't. But I didn't look at that as a failure. I just looked at it that wasn't my glass ceiling to break. The nonprofit was going to be, and I pivoted. So.
Go ahead. I was just going to share a little bit about my fundraising story. And quite simply, I think I had a mindset about fundraising in the same way as I had about creating the product and going to market with that and so forth, right? So what I did was a lot of testing and iterating. And I think that was the mindset that I had going into fundraising. So I would say that I wasn't immediately kind of set on, okay, I'm going to bootstrap it versus I'm going to raise capital, right? My mindset was I'm going to test the market to understand what the landscape is, what the appetite is, how can I tweak my pitch, take in some feedback that's relevant and ignore the feedback that's not, but modify it from there. And what was really interesting in my journey was there were several points where I could have taken a deal, but it was a really bad deal, right? And I remember this very, very clearly was one of the first people my co-founder and I pitched, he actually offered us $1 million like on the spot, but it was a really bad deal. And I won't mention names, but he's kind of a shady guy. And so... Dave McClure? Well, let's just say that he wanted to meet with us at the Cliff Hotel at 11 p.m. It was really shady. But like when you're a founder and you're raising capital, it's like, okay, I'll take the meeting, but we're not drinking any alcohol and we're gonna like sit in the lobby, But we could have taken that deal, but it was a bad deal. So I think one thing is to be mindful of, people might offer you money, but you have to be thoughtful. Like, are they the right partner? Because once you get them on board as an investor, it's kind of like a marriage, right? Like, honestly, we think back to that moment all the time. And had we taken that money, we would be miserable right now, right? If he's on our board and we have to deal with him and, so that was one of the best decisions that we ever made. So I would say, test the market, do coffee meetings, like get feedback and all that stuff before you make this decision of like, should I bootstrap or should I raise, institutional capital?
I'm sort of curious, like where the question's coming from in terms of if you're asking because you're wondering what you should do for your company, and I think that it really, like kind of the same answer in terms of like charting your own course. It really depends so much on your own business. I think even the decision to raise venture money is one that should be asked and not sort of assumed. And I think it kind of goes to like, what kind of company do you want to build? And ideally, it's super hard to know, honestly, until you've kind of been in it. Ideally, you would have clarity on that. That said, I think what I did was I raised kind of friends and family money. I bootstrapped in the beginning, and then I did friends and family money, and it was sort of like 10K here, 20K there, over a 2-year period. So it was really just barely surviving. And once we got a little bit of money, we pretty much put it all into product. And most people didn't make anything. You know, people were kind of making 20K a year salary. I was making nothing. I mean, we were kind of just barely surviving, putting one foot in front of the other. If I had it all to do over again, I don't think I would do it that way. I think I would go out more aggressively, ask for a large check. If I was like, I'm going to raise a venture-backed company, and I'm shooting, and this is kind of the path I want to take the company down, I would go out more aggressively, ask for a big check early on, and sell the vision. And what I was doing was I was selling the metrics in a way that I didn't really have the metrics. The metrics could have been 10x what they were, and it would not have made a difference at that point. So I was kind of in that trap. But I also think not raising venture money is actually a pretty interesting option and certainly worth considering. You can build a great business that way. So I would also just kind of throw that out there.
Cool. Can we get a round of applause for everyone? Sorry, we actually can't take any more questions.